Hi, I'm poet and writer Kay Spivey, and today I want to talk to you about compiling a poetry manuscript. I actually got tagged to do this by the wonderful Shelley Flowers Reads and Writes. If you haven't checked out her channel, I'm going to leave a link down below. If you're into poetry and booktube and all of that, she's a great channel. She's pretty new. I think she's only been doing this for a short time, but she has a wonderful channel and she tagged me to do this. She has a great video on editing and compiling her poetry manuscript, and I'm currently working on editing and compiling mine. I've been kind of meaning to do a video and then I kept putting it off, and then she tagged me, so now I have to. So thank you very much. And I'm gonna kind of walk you through my process. I'm gonna go as in depth as I can. I know I've talked about some parts to compiling a manuscript before and things that work for me, and I have already done some of the steps. I'm already a little bit of a ways into working on this, but I'm still gonna go through kind of what the steps have been up to this point, what my next steps are going to be to get this ready to send out, because this year I'm gonna try and see if I can't get a poetry collection professionally published. Please wish me luck. I've done this before way in the past, and it is a long and kind of fruitless process. There are very few places that you can submit a full poetry manuscript to. There are very short windows for it. You can't really get an agent in poetry. That you'd have to be kind of a megastar in order to land something like that. It's very different from novels. That's why self-publishing is such a good route for poetry, but I've talked again, there's kind of a high risk, low reward system. People don't buy poetry. People buy poetry more than they used to, but still they don't buy it in kind of the breakout numbers that like fantasy gets bought or young adult gets bought. Like, that's still not where poetry is. So a lot of the bigger publishers have very small windows. Some of them don't take any unsolicited manuscripts. Becoming solicited is going to be really hard. You have to, again, be a huge breakout. It's a lot of entering contests, trying to see whether or not they're rigged. It's an arduous process, but it's one I want to undertake again. I want to try again, and I think I have a manuscript that's going to do well doing that process. Let me talk you through kind of the order of operations when it comes to compiling a poetry manuscript. So the very first thing is I write the poems. All of my poetry starts off in a notebook. You might be asking yourself, Kay, how come you still have the exact same notebook that you had way back when you lived in Death Valley 3 years ago? And to that I'd say, shut up. I'm halfway done with it, leave me alone. So everything gets handwritten into the notebook, and then every so often I'll just go through and type up the poems that I feel like have potential. The process for that is I'll go back to probably when the last time I typed things up would be, just sometime when I'm in the mood, and I'll edit through the poems that I really think were good, that had potential, that could go somewhere, that are more than just like, you know, when you just gotta get something out, it's very much it's just for you, and that's why they stay in the journal. But the good ones, I'll edit and then I'll type up. And after I've typed them, they look very different when they're typed to when they're handwritten. So I'll edit back through again and read it aloud. Then those sit in a folder, and the folder is called Kay's Poetry, and that's it. That's all it's called. So they'll sit in the poetry folder for a long time, and when I'm ready to start compiling a poetry manuscript, as I have been at the beginning of this year, I create a folder called To Publish. I have a folder also called Published, so I don't kind of overlap the new poems coming in and the poems that I'm trying to get published now. So I have my published folder, and then I have my To Publish folder, which starts off empty. And I go through and just choose poems that I feel like are ready, that I feel like are going to go into this manuscript. And I just choose a lot. I mean, I just kind of go nuts with it, honestly. Anything that I feel like is close goes straight into that folder. Then I go back through and kind of take a look at what's there. What's the overall theme? For this particular collection, I kind of went through a couple different phases. I was using all of kind of the newer poetry, and then as I looked at it, a lot of it was really political, and then I wanted to expand my horizons a bit. So I went back to poems that I had felt weren't ready, but were also hugely political, or that kind of had that same tone, and I drew those in too. And I keep going until I have at least 50 poems in the to publish place that feel like they all kind of mesh together. And you just have to use your best judgment when you're doing that, especially just that first round through. You just have to kind of feel it out, like what are the poems that kind of go well together. And then the next step is I print them all out. I print out everything in the to publish folder, then I take a good hard look at them. For this, I lay them all out flat on the ground. I think Shelly Flowers, when she did her video, she hangs them up. I gotta get a setup like that. That is so much better, and the cats would not be able to walk all over them, which is why they're all kind of, they don't lie flat anymore. The cats were having a real good time with my manuscript. That's what it's really about, entertaining your cats, right? Like, that's why we do poetry. So I lay them all out flat once, and I go through and I look at them, like which ones do not fit. And initially, I think I had printed out like 80 poems, and it sort of felt like I had two manuscripts. And so I split them up and looked at them, and both of them were not quite a full manuscript. They both felt like chapbooks. And I had to have another think about it. Having two separate chapbooks come out at the same time seemed like a really good idea initially, but not if they're not going to be long enough to actually be a full collection. Not if they're going to need either to have a whole bunch more poems written, or if they're going to, you know, be two chapbooks. I want it to be one congruous collection. My next step then was rethink the whole thing. I pulled together the ones that felt like they kind of went together, and I set aside the ones that kind of felt like they didn't. One collection then ended up having more poems. I sat down and looked at just those poems. There were some more poems actually that I hadn't thought about before that suddenly came to mind, and I went ahead and printed those as well. And in the end, I ended up with around 50 poems. And then I sat down, I collected them all together, mishmash, just however they were lined up on the floor, that just felt like they all kind of went together, even though they were in no particular order. And I went through and edited them. This was the red pen edit, but I used a green pen. I don't know if that's going to show up that well. I'll show you kind of what my editing notes look like. Hopefully you'll be able to see. There we go. So I write in notes to myself. I did this poem actually, it has a good amount. And keep in mind, these are all poems. Every single poem that's going into this collection. Ooh, get the lighting back. Figure out where we are. There we go. Keep in mind, these are all poems that I have previously edited multiple times. To get them into the to publish folder, I've edited them a minimum of 3 times. Minimum of in the journal, on the computer, and then when they went over to the folder. And a lot of them have gone through more revisions than that. Some of them I've sent out to publish in literary journals. One poem in here has been accepted, but it's not getting published until January, which is a long way actually. Usually it's kind of rare. Usually literary journals are like wanting you for their next publication, and so January is a long way off, but like I'm excited about it. I'm just gonna have to be careful about when this one gets published, because I have the anticipation of one of the poems. It just goes so well, I didn't want to cut it out, that is going to be published next year. I do my red pen with a green pen this time, revisions on every single poem. I go through and just really honestly, like, what is working, what is not working. And then after I've finished all of that, I lay them back out on the floor again. And this time I sort of had a theme in mind. And this time, for kind of the first time ever, I wanted the poems to be a little bit chronological. Not necessarily chronological to me writing them, although obviously it did end up that way for most of them, but chronological to kind of the events that have taken place in the last about 5 years. A lot of things have been infuriating, disheartening in the past at least 5 years, but you know, since the last election cycle, I've been having some strong emotions, and they've been coming out in the poetry. So I took all of those kinds of poems. Sorry, I have like cat toothpaste in my hair. That is totally what I'm feeling right here. I brushed the cat's teeth this morning and I totally have cat toothpaste in my hair. This is cat mom life. Anyway, with that in mind, there are some poems that have dates to them. That made it really easy. I lined up those poems so they each represented the year, and I chose the other poems to go with them. Having a chronological kind of setup like that made this so much easier than a lot of my previous collections, where actually An Isolated Storm went through a whole bunch of different kind of iterations, but following the seasons was never something that changed dramatically. So I just had to choose like which seasons, which order, and then put the poems in that way so that we're kind of going through them. That was when I figured this whole thing out, was back when I did An Isolated Storm. Fragments, I have very distinct sections, and I do not want to do distinct sections for this collection since I've done that with Fragments. I had very distinct sections. I have stories, moments, silences, and lives, which were titles that I chose for them. It is hard with this light, it's so bright, you can't even tell. It was really important to have these distinct sections so that I could have a lot of the more narrative poetry. I like the storytelling poems a lot. And that's not what this collection's going to be. This one's going to be very different. I took out all of the kind of storytelling poems. Anything that's not kind of like newsy related, that's a story, is out. Then I lay them all out and really felt out the order. Laid them out on the floor so that then it was like, I think it started with like 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So I could see them all and rearranged and rearranged. And then when I felt kind of solid with that, I picked them all up in order and I numbered the bottoms of the pages. So I have now, because I did add in and take out as I was looking at them, there were more poems, or there were poems from the parts that I had taken out before that I was like, actually they'll fit in with this section. So there are 51 distinct poems here. A lot of them are quite long, so actually this book could end up being pretty chunky once you format it up. Yeah, most of them are an entire page. This front one is an entire full page. Most of them are a full page or multiple pages. Just because I have a lot of feelings this time. So 51 distinct poems, which is a really good number to start with. My next step now that I have these poems and in this order is I'm going to go through and do the edits that I've done on the page into the computer so that each poem now reflects the best it can be from now. Once I've finished all the revisions for all 51 poems put in, I'm going to put them into one single Word document in the order that I've chosen. And this is where it starts to get a little bit tricky, especially with the moving them around. It's very easy to move around pages on the ground, which is why I highly recommend printing them out. It's so much easier. But once I put them into the computer, it's going to be a little bit harder to copy and paste and reformat and all of that. But that is going to be the next step. I'm going to do the editing today. I'm going to do the inputting them into one file today. And then here's where the next steps come in. This is kind of like, it's getting exciting for me now. It's starting to feel real. This was a good idea to sit down and talk to you guys about my process and my order, because it's starting to feel real that I'm really gonna get this collection like done. I've been talking about it for what? I've been talking about it for like since Fragments came out, haven't I? And I've had the poems for it. A lot of these are pretty new, and I feel very strongly that as a creative person, sometimes you just have to wait until the universe comes together. Like, you keep working and you keep up the momentum, but sometimes the stars align. And for poetry books, I feel like you wait until the stars align, and they aligned, and I have an idea and a thing and a focus. So I'm really excited about this. But okay, so the next steps then, after it's all in, I'm going to be doing two things. One is the newly, freshly re-revised, re-edited poems. I'm going to send some out to be published in literary journals. Now, the reason you want to get poetry published in literary journals is it adds a ton of credibility to your poems. Now, let me just grab any old random book off the shelf. This is a John Ray Bickey one. And you're going to find almost every single published book of poetry has a big old section in the front or the back that's either going to be acknowledgments or previously published, sometimes it says, but they're going to say where the poems that are in the book also were. Being previously published is one of the things that makes you look professional. I'll give you another example here. Let's use Dinez Smith. Dinez Smith's Don't Call Us Dead. Let me see if his is in the front or the back. His acknowledgements also. Oh, it's so hard to see. Where you can see where other poems were featured. It is important. It does add a lot of credibility to your poetry that you have other places that they've been published. I have those sections in my other poetry books because it is important. Here's the acknowledgement section for Fragments. So I want to build up other publication credits. Now, I believe more than just the one poem that I'm thinking of that just recently got accepted for the publication in January have been published. I'll have to look through. I think, yeah, one of them also, I have Dear Tomorrow in this one also, which was published last year. So there are already poems that have been published, but having more of them is just going to add a lot of credibility to this book, proving to people that other people already want to read my poetry, and also getting my name out there. This is like pre-marketing. This is sort of the pre-order campaign when it comes to poetry. People already seeing my name attached to poems that they love, that they read in literary journals with other poems that they love, that they already know are going to be good because they trust this publication. They see my name with that and they can look me up. And if they find that this poem has been published in a collection, they're going to want to read the other poems in that collection. For example, if someone were to pick up your book in a store and be like, I don't know about this person, but oh, they've been published in this literary magazine that I love, obviously it means they're probably pretty good. You see why this is the game you gotta play with poetry. This is kind of the sneaky way to get the marketing going. Like, this is more effective than a pre-order campaign in terms of poetry, because again, it's hard to find your audience, but they're out there. They're just reading literary journals half the time. This is one of the things I always try to do, and I'm always sending out poems as they become completed, but these ones are going to be freshly beautiful and ready to be sent out. So the only thing you have to be really, really careful about then is anywhere that you send out to a literary journal, you need to be careful with the rights, that as soon as the publication is complete, the rights will revert back to you, and that you are then able to publish your own work immediately after they've published it. Otherwise, you're going to have to kind of finagle. Like, for example, this book then can't come out before January of next year because one of the poems I want to include is going to be, they've got the rights until that time. You see what I'm saying here? After that, after publication, rights revert back to me and I am able to publish. You just have to be careful and read the fine print and know at what time you can republish your own work, and just be careful with who you're sending it to if you're already compiling a collection. Does that make any sense? If that doesn't make sense, or if you have more questions about that, leave a comment down below and I'll try to answer a little bit fuller. I think I also answered this question for somebody on a different video, but off the top of my head I don't remember what video it was. But I can look up because I have my phone here. Give me one sec. Let's just... Oh, it was Sarah Kirkall on my pros and cons of self-publishing poetry video, which I will also link in the cards and down below. If you came here for advice, that's going to help a lot with determining what route you should go. And also I'll link my compiling a poetry collection video, which is kind of old now, but also has really good information. But anyway, so I'll be sending it out to literary journals, and simultaneously I'm going to get some friends to read it. I'm going to see if some of my critique partners are interested in reading it. Some of the people who read for Fragments or for An Isolated Storm, if they're free and interested right now, I'm going to see if they'll read it and just start getting some feedback. Getting feedback from people I already know and trust, and maybe even looking for some beta readers to just go over it and make sure that there's not, especially what I hate, what is the worst thing is when there's just like between one poem and the next, it's like there's a gap, there's something missing, there's like static noise. So you read one and then you go to the other and you're like, what happened? I hate that when you're reading it, and it's so easy to do with poetry because just like one, then one, then one. But they should flow. There shouldn't feel like there's that static noise between them. It should feel like this one has led to this one. And sometimes getting someone else's perspective on that is really helpful. Sometimes getting someone else's perspective on the word choice is really helpful, because I have used the wrong version of hoard. Didn't know there were two versions of hoard. I'm not that good with spelling. I'm not like a grammar Nazi or anything like that. I didn't know that hoard and hoard were different things, like hoarding something and also have like a hoard of something have different spellings. So someone corrected me on that, which is one of those things that like spell checker was never gonna get. I was never gonna get. I didn't know there were different things. Gotta have other eyes on your work for like catching the dumb things and also catching the important things. So I'm gonna start doing that. That'll be the next step. Once I get through with that and I've sent out, I'm going to start sending to literary contests and to literary publications. There are such small dates. I've actually marked some in my phone for some of the bigger publishing journals when they're very tiny windows. It's usually like a month that they accept unsolicited manuscripts, which is terrible. And there's processing fees. It's a real big pain in the butt when you go into publishing, like professionally publishing poetry. There's quite a few gatekeepers. There's not a lot of gates that are credible and that are going to return your investment. And I've talked about this quite a bit. You really have to be careful where you send your poetry. A lot of places charge a reading and processing fee now. And I was looking around. Now, it used to be like $20 and it was like, okay. Now it's like $30 and a lot of places, I mean like Copper Canyon Press was asking for $30. And I was just like, is it worth it? But also, they're a huge name in poetry publishing. So is it worth having that name attached to the poetry to then send $30 for them to possibly reject it? Like, it's kind of a tricky field. And I have so many thoughts about this, and like it bothers me how poorly poets are treated by the publishing industry, and it's not really like their fault or our fault. There isn't as big an audience. It's harder to get people to read and pay for poetry, and they're trying to make up the money somewhere. And so because there are a lot of poets, they're making up their money from the poets. There's very few poets in the world who are going to get like a return on investment. That's always been the case. Like, you see these breakout stars who are really making quite good money. The next tier down for poetry is like not making any money. You see, like, there's like, you know, A, B, C tiers when it comes to like fiction or nonfiction publishing. With poetry, there's kind of the A tier and the rest of us, and then the people who aren't publishing. Like, it's very hard to get your book read and get people interested and to keep that momentum going. Like, and the market is getting a lot better. It's just the reality of it is poetry publishers don't treat you very well. That's the reality of it. There's a reason people self-publish poetry, but I want to try because I want to kind of take that next step, to be at that next level. I'm talking myself out of it as we sit here. Self-publishing just makes so much more sense for poetry, and people get so much further, and a lot of people who are traditionally published, like for poetry, started off self-publishing, and they may have even self-published their most popular book. I mean, The Princess Saves Herself with this one is one of the ones I'm thinking of. It was successful as a self-published book and then kind of got picked up. That's how a lot of poetry that's making a lot of money happens. We'll go into the playing the game with the publishers once I get to that step. Right now, what I'm doing is taking these poems and getting them all clean and shiny in the computer and all together and sending out some queries to literary magazines, which I don't have to pay for because I don't send out anywhere that charges any kind of fees anymore, for reasons I've also talked about. You don't have to pay hardly ever when you're sending out for short stories, just FYI. Nobody asks for like processing fees or anything like that, or reading fees. Like, it's so rare when you're sending out for fiction. It's like non-existent when you're sending out nonfiction apparently, but it's like everyone asks for it with poetry, and they also don't pay you very well or don't pay you at all. And if they're not going to pay you, if they accept your work and they're charging a reading fee, it's a skip for me. They have to have a significant payment in order for me to feel like it's justified to pay their $3 to $10 reading fee. Anything over $5 is actually ridiculous. It's not a reading fee at that point. Stay away from anyone charging for like just groups of poems. Manuscripts, Apparently the whole industry is different. But my warning, if any literary magazine to publish like one of your poems or like a short group of poems in their journal, if they're asking for a reading fee higher than like $5, do not send to them. Just don't. $3 is kind of the average because that helps pay their submittable fees. But in my opinion, they then should offer payment upon publication, and most of them don't. And like I said, I don't send to those ones anymore. So yeah, that's been my PSA. Now I'm gonna go I'm gonna go work on this poetry book. This is probably gonna be more like a part 1 since I just rambled and raved and went over everything rather than doing more of a blog style. If you're really into more of a blog style compilation, again, Shelly Flowers Reads and Writes, I will have her channel linked below. Hers was a really good blog where she really walked you through all of the steps rather than just talking at you, which is what I'm doing. Once I have this all done, I probably will do a part 2 and let you know kind of how things are going, and should the best happen, I will let you know, obviously. Probably, okay, whenever, however, this poetry collection is coming out, at some point, way in the distant future probably, I'll end up doing a live stream to let you know about it. So this will be between you and me. Someday there'll be a live stream for this lovely book. And yeah, okay, so let me just really quickly though go over other things that are gonna need to get done. This is gonna happen after people have looked at it, kind of after I've gone through a beta reading process. I'm gonna have to come up with a title for the whole collection. I'm gonna have to at least get some idea of a cover in my head, because if I do end up self-publishing, I'm gonna have to get working on a cover. I'm gonna have to collect my acknowledgements, all of the kind of end page things. I'm gonna have to get that all together. I'm gonna have to create a cover letter, because a lot of the traditional publishers do ask for a cover letter to go with your manuscript. And all of those are things I'm working on, not today. Today, like I said, typing up the edits, getting the journal together, and sending out a few poems to literary journals. Any comments, any questions, please leave them down below. I will also have links to other people putting together their poetry collections that might be a little more helpful, and also links to other videos I've done about compiling your poetry collection. There will be all kinds of resources. So you know what? This is like a one-stop shop for you. If you are like struggling to get your poetry collection all together, I got you. Just click on everything. Just watch them all and you will just like get an idea. Now, understanding everyone's process is a little bit different. It's a creative work, but we're all trying to get kind of to the same, we're not even trying to get to the same place. All the poetry books are different. We're not all created exactly equal. We're all creative works. We are all works in progress. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm gonna go eat some watermelon and get this going. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a great day. I'll talk to you again soon, and good luck to all of us. Bye!